Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. Please do hit the like button. That helps boost this show in YouTube's algorithm. And we have a big one today as Israel's genocidal war on Palestine and the region continues unabated. Its isolation grows, and the U.S. and the U.K. have doubled down on their support for Netanyahu and the Israeli regime, and they've set their sights on domestic opposition. In the Labour Prime Minister UK Keir Starmer's government, we saw a friend of the show, George Galloway, host of Moats and former British MP, be detained at Gatwick Airport under the Terrorism Act for a total of 9 hours between he and his wife. And one of the questions asked by the heavily armed police was, what were their views on Gaza and why did they have them? Now, Netanyahu himself is talking about using TikTok as a weapon of war following the Trump sale of that social media outlet. And even as the European leaders and Donald Trump himself are talking about peace, no one believes them. So one has to ask, what explains this desperation? What explains this crackdown? What does it mean in the wider view of both geopolitics and the world situation? And to do all of this, to talk about all of this, I have very special guests. First time on the show, I'm going to introduce Matt Kennard. He is an investigative journalist and author. He has done incredible work and author of many books and articles, especially on the UK's role in the Gaza genocide. Matt, good to see you. Great to be with you. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Of course. Then we have Patrick Henningsen. He is the co-founder of 21st Century Wire. He also has his own Substack as well, journalist and commentator. Patrick, good to see you.
Great to be with you, Danny.
And then we have former CIA analyst and geopolitical commentator, Larry Johnson. Good to see you today, Larry.
I'm here. Thanks.
All right. Yes. Well, Matt, I wanted to start with you. You know, we have a situation where George Galloway, a British MP for many years, actually sat in the rooms where the Terrorism Act was discussed. He was detained at the airport. He joins many who have been harassed under the Terrorism Act. People like Asa Winstanley, who was a friend of this show, of Electronic Intifada, Richard Medhurst, another friend of this show, and British journalist, Syrian British journalist, and Kit Clarenberg, and so many others. This was George's words himself about what exactly happened in the airport, and I will just play that really quickly and then get your commentary. Here we go.
Airport in England, but it is not the reason that they stated. We were questioned, myself for around 4 hours, Gayatri for around 5 hours, and then released without charge. For what charge could there possibly have been? How could we, me and Gayatri, have anything to do with terrorism? How? Well, we certainly were not enlightened during the collective 9 hours of questioning. Not a single effort was made to show cause for having detained me and her with armed officers in public in an English airport. Not a single question. And they ranged far and wide, right down to Gayatri's famous fingernail painted in the Palestinian colors. Why? Why is your fingernail painted in the Palestinian colors? What's your attitude to the conflict in Gaza? Who persuaded you of this point of view? Why do you admire Mr. Lavrov? Why are you so friendly to China, a country with which Britain maintains absolute and full diplomatic relations? And every big company in the United Kingdom is doing business with China. And we're not. They would dearly love to be. What does that have to do with terrorism? What do my views on Xi Jinping have to do with terrorism? What do my views on Lavrov have to do with terrorism?
So, Matt, you know, you're no stranger to both UK politics, its complicity in the genocide in Gaza, as well as this Terrorism Act. So what are your impressions of this? How do you see this in the bigger picture of what's going on both in the region, West Asia, vis-a-vis Israel, and the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, firstly, the detention of Galloway and his wife is a massive escalation because up till now, you haven't had prominent politicians being detained under Terrorism Act at airports. So, I mean, Galloway is one of the most prominent figures over the last 25 years in British politics. You know, he was a MP, i.e. an elected representative of British Parliament for 16 years. He was one of the leading voices against the war in Iraq, leading voices for Palestine for many decades, and also testified quite famously in US Congress about the war in Iraq. So to detain him is quite a reach. But again, it comes at a time when we're literally seeing our rights being stripped away piece by piece. And it's all being done using the Terrorism Act. So this is an act which was passed in 2000 when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister. And it is a hugely repressive and authoritarian piece of legislation. And it allows the police effectively to do what they want, especially at airports, but even outside of airports. You mentioned Asa Winstanley in your introduction. And in October 2024, this again was unprecedented. His house was raided by police in a dawn raid. They took all his journalistic devices, and he wasn't arrested or charged with anything. Now, up to that point, I didn't even think the police could do that in England. But apparently, they can break into your house and take all your stuff and not even charge you or arrest you. So we're in a very sticky situation. The other thing is that we don't have a media which covers this stuff. You would have thought if any media worth its salt or actually taking its job seriously, that the Asa Winstanley raid would have been all over the press, i.e. on the front pages. This is something that is seriously scary for especially for journalists, but for everyone. And it's never been written about in the mainstream media ever. Even after he won a case against the police, that what they did was unlawful. So I think, and as you say, it does fit into a wider context, and it's all being done effectively at the behest of Israel. And the Israel lobby in this country is extremely powerful, and they're obviously, I think they're targeting people who have become problematic for them. And ACE has been leading on the work on the Israel lobby in this country for the last 10 years, really. And I'm sure, I don't have any evidence for this, but I don't think it's too much of a reach to say that they probably were involved in that the police doing that raid. You also have recently the Palestine Action prescription, which again involves the Terrorism Act, and prescription is again a hugely authoritarian move, even within the context of actual terrorist groups, because it means that you don't have free speech. It's an attack on free speech completely. So before they prescribed Hamas in the early 2000s, and Hezbollah, the political wing, was prescribed in 2019 at the behest of the Israel lobby. That's all recorded. And the important part of that section under the Terrorism Act, that prescription, one is that it makes membership of that organization illegal, but I actually don't think that's the most important part of it. The most important part of it is that it stops being able to voice support for that organization if an organization is prescribed. And you're seeing well over 1,000 people arrested in the UK just for saying, now I support Palestine Action. And that is why I think they prescribed Palestine Action. I don't actually think what they do is in terms of trespassing and doing damage to weapons of war is illegal. They don't need any more tools to go after those people. And actually, there were many people in prison before the prescription. What that prescription was about dampening down on speech of British people, because I think, and I'll finish with this, I think Israel sees what's happened in the UK as a real loss over the past 2 years, maybe more than anywhere else in Europe and in the West, because we've had consistently the largest demonstrations against the genocide. We've had Palestine Action was founded in the UK, and it's the most effective organization for really damaging the Israeli war machine. And I think that they are now gone using the tools of repression and using the law to try and discipline a population they've lost control of effectively. They haven't got control of the narrative anymore, even though they've largely got the mainstream media on their side, Obviously, the government is pumping out all the usual propaganda, but the people aren't buying it anymore. So I think that what you're seeing is a real erosion of our liberties and our rights on behalf of this tiny little country in West Asia. And obviously, it's also happening in the United States. Unprecedented things are happening in the United States. Like, for example, one really shocking thing, and I know I shouldn't be shocked by this because it's become normalized now, but that Turkish student who was grabbed off the street by ICE officers for writing this article in a student newspaper that was critical of Israel. And it wasn't even an extreme article, it was a super moderate article. I thought, wow, that is a really scary thing to see. And then you're also seeing Trump the other day mooting the idea that the federal government will withdraw disaster relief funding to any state which votes to boycott Israel. Again, insane scenario that you have that degree of control. This is a degree of control. You can say things about your own government, criticize them in a way that you can't criticize Israel. So it's a wider crackdown. But I think and I think it will get worse in the short term. But I think it is also a sign of success in terms of the resistance to Zionism and the resistance to the genocide, because it has been effective in completely transforming the consciousness of people around the world, and that's why we got to carry on. And effectively, the risk that we're taking, and obviously it wasn't nice what happened to George Galloway, it wasn't nice what happened to Asa, but compared to what they're doing in Gaza and also in the West Bank, but especially in Gaza to the journalists, they literally just massacre journalists all the time and their families. So we have to use the tools we have, and we have to take the risk that maybe we wouldn't have in a different time, because if we stop using our rights, or we stop seeing these as rights that we possess, then they will just wither and die.
Yeah, great points, Matt. And to that, Patrick, I'll turn to you. Here's the reporting that was happening during the detainment of George Galloway. George Galloway claims police detained him for 9 hours. This is the kind of stuff coming out of British media. Of course, it's not much better in the United States, as you know, Patrick. But what are your comments on this situation and where it fits in the overall geopolitical and world situation?
Well, I think Matt outlined the really important salient points on this issue. I can just reiterate that and maybe underline it a little bit by saying that the term terrorism, the way it's being bandied about now, how arbitrarily it's being bandied about, it's been watered down to such a degree it doesn't really mean anything anymore. Hence, it can be applied to just about anything. Anything that exposes state crimes, exposes state hypocrisy, exposes policy. And you need to pay attention to how the wording around these issues are being applied. And increasingly in recent years, we'll say, well, it's a threat to national security. We're detaining you because of the Terrorism Act, but also on the grounds that you might be a threat to national security. Then it becomes national interests. So you go all the way from, how do you define national interests? Well, anything that basically makes the government look bad, anything that challenges government policy, that's can be deemed under, threatening national interests. This is what Marco Rubio, the type of language he was applying to the student protesters on U.S. campuses who were protesting the genocide in Gaza. So it's a real sort of evolution in how the language is being applied by the state. And the bottom line on all of this is, and I think we need to go back to the original point, which Matt also outlined, which is the real point is by proscribing the political wing of Hamas or the political wing of Hezbollah. Hezbollah holds a large number of seats in the Lebanese parliament, okay, and has done for a long time. So to quote, label them as a terrorist group at the behest of the Israeli lobby, I'm talking about the United States, Britain, France didn't proscribe the funny enough, the political wing of Hezbollah, I think only until recently, but years before they didn't. The European Union, Germany, and etc., some European countries. And so this means that there's no way that you can have any kind of a political conversation around foreign policy. So this is, to me, a huge con. And the real con is, and the real danger is these moves, these unilateral moves by a specific set of governments, i.e. allies of Israel, that the real target is international law. The real target is international law. because by attacking the political wing, that means you can justify wiping out an entire parliament, like the Israelis tried to do largely successfully recently with Yemen, under the guise that these are terrorists, that this country are full of terrorists, and that the population of Gaza are all terrorists or terrorist sympathizers. Therefore, you basically get carte blanche to do whatever you want. And the results can be absolutely horrific, barbaric, and apocalyptic, as we've seen over the last 2 years. So it's not just words. These aren't just words we're dealing with here. It's the concept behind them and how governments are wielding and using them. That's really, I think, a huge threat to international law, international order, and civility. And quite frankly, I'm not going to exaggerate, Western civilization on the whole. I think that's what's really hanging in the balance right now.
Larry, you're a former CIA analyst, and you're also a friend of George Galloway and his show.
Yep.
How do you see this attack in the sense of, Matt brought up a kind of desperation. It definitely appears very desperate that the UK authorities and, of course, the entirety of the UK establishment are now going after George Galloway as a voice of resistance that kind of speaks to the entire situation that both Patrick and Matt laid out. What is your reaction to this?
Well, it's one thing to go after George. I mean, he's an outspoken and articulate fellow, but to go after Gayatri, his wife, I was with them both in Moscow. I guess it was in June. And this is just absolutely outrageous for them to get treated this way. But look, it boils down to, two things. If you want to go out and protest, criticize, condemn, vilify China, you get a pat on the ass. Hey, the same with Cuba. Demonize them in the West. Good on you. It's only if you're dealing with the Zionists in Israel and their clique, their moneyed clique, which hangs on in both the Christian communities in the United States and in Europe, or the Russians, if you express any counter to that narrative. I mean, it's a very narrow but specific attack on trying to contain, to defeat a particular narrative while protecting and enhancing a narrative that's literally falling apart at the seams. So this is, it's alarming, but we've seen this tendency, the ability of the public to be so easily manipulated. As an example, we're told that Hamas, we're always told it's a terrorist organization. Really? How many actual terrorist acts have they carried out? I looked into that. I tried to count them up. So over a 25-year period, from August 2000 through the data set I had went through April of 2024. Mind you, the data set came from the Israeli Foreign Ministry, so it's not like it was a Larry Johnson created product. Only 105 attacks, and I'm putting those in quotation marks because a lot of it were what you'd call retaliatory strikes, vendettas, the kind of violence we saw here in America when the Hatfield and McCoys were shooting at one another. Compare that with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which in 2018, 2019 were listed in the top 10 of worldwide terrorist groups. So in other words, in just 1 year, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham had more terrorist attacks than Hamas did in 25 years. And yet, who's embracing the leader, al-Jalani, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, now called al-Shara, dressed up in his nifty Brooks Brothers outfit, trimmed beard, trimmed hair? Oh, that's us. That's the Brits. So the hypocrisy on this stinks, but it's it's become the modus operandi of modern day.
Yeah, Matt, maybe you can bring us home here on this particular issue. I know that you've been the author of many books. I know you have another book forthcoming, Rogue Reporter versus the American Empire. You also wrote Silent Coup. Could you talk about, you've done a lot of investigations on kind of the corporate side here, and you've also really have dived deep into kind of the ways in which the UK is really operating for Israel and doing everything it can to forward Israel's interest in the region. Why is this? What are some of the bigger root causes for why someone like George Galloway, as well as the other journalists now, and there's and activists as well, these particular targeted groups, they're coming under heavy fire from the UK government itself? What are some of the root causes of this from your investigations? Oh, sorry, you were muted. Here you go.
Okay. One of the root causes, it's not from my investigations, but it's just a structural factor, is we don't have a constitution in this country. So we don't have our rights protected in the same way you do in the States. We have what's called an unwritten constitution, but it's complicated and based on norms, and it's very, very easy to bend. And this is basically you realize that because they're not written down, they don't exist. And this goes back way further than just the genocide. We had Julian Assange in Belmarsh maximum security prison for 5 years, most of that as a remand prisoner, someone who was just his conviction had been spent and he was being held on remand. He was also detained in the Ecuadorian embassy unlawfully. That was according to the UN for 7 years before that. And barely anyone batted an eyelid when he was in Belmarsh. And they did things that were just you'd expect from a dictatorship. They wouldn't let people in. He wasn't allowed even visits from NGOs and people like that. So there's a long history of that. And I think it just goes to the point, which is that power will protect itself from dissidents and people who are trying to reveal the truth about them. Now, when you're brought up in the UK and I guess the US too, you're told, well, we have a media and an NGO, or sorry, a civil society sector which guards our rights and protects us from the excesses of the state. That doesn't exist in the UK at all. The public realm in the UK lies completely undefended because the media don't cover these issues. So, for example, I mentioned Asa's case never being mentioned in the media. Barely anything about the Assange in Belmarsh and the corruption in his case was ever covered. The BBC, right? I don't know if you guys remember. I can't remember how many. It was like maybe 4 years ago. There was an article in Yahoo News, which was based on testimony of 30 former senior US officials who had worked in the first Trump administration. And this article was about how Pompeo had been asked by Trump to draw sketches for assassinating or killing or kidnapping Assange in London. And that article also said that the British had agreed to do the shooting if needed to. Okay, so there you have a foreign power scheming to assassinate a journalist in the heart of London because they don't like his reporting. This is such an outrage. It's beyond comprehension. But that article was covered by The Guardian. The only part of the BBC in which it was ever mentioned was BBC Somali. So the only way you know about it if you read the BBC is if you can speak Somali. And that's what we live with. We live in there's a hyper reality that's created by the media, and the real stuff, the real stuff that reveals how the system works, is just completely excised from that media and from civil society as well. And that's largely because there's been operations by the state and the corporate sector to co-opt the media and civil society, as you might expect, because they don't want any kind of resistance to what they're doing. So that's the situation. And just to go to your point about the UK's role in all this, the UK is central to the whole imperial system. And this is something I didn't really understand properly until we started Declassified UK, because I'd always focused on the United States. And we all know the United States is overwhelmingly the most powerful country in the world, has its military dwarfs everything else. And I always thought UK was a bit part player, a bit pathetic, always just hung on the coattails of the US to keep itself relevant. But that you realize, actually, we are central to the whole thing, and we provide us a range of services to the Americans, which are actually quite useful. One good example of this is when the empire was decommissioned after the Second World War, or when we're told the empire was decommissioned, it wasn't actually. We retained loads of what are called 14 what are called British overseas territories. One of them is on Cyprus. So Cyprus got independence in the great sort of decolonial period when in 1960 it got made independent from Britain. But not many people know, even here, that 3% of Cyprus was retained by the UK, and it was turned into massive intelligence and military installations, one called Akrotiri and one called Dekelia. And those have been pretty much from the start also joint bases with the Americans, unofficially, because they don't want the Cypriot government to know. But Akrotiri has a permanent unit from the US Air Force station there. Dekelia is run by the GCHQ, which is the UK's largest intelligence agency, alongside the NSA. And actually, Edward Snowden's leak showed that the NSA pay half of the upkeep for Dekelia. So, and then when the genocide started, you saw it became the central international site for supplying and supporting the genocide in Gaza. So regular US Air Force military transport flights were going, carrying weapons. Regular RAF cargo flights were going. They started spy flights, the British from there, which are still going till today, that spend 5 hours over Gaza collecting intelligence, which is relayed to the Israeli military in real time. So you really have, and in fact, the genocide itself has really kind of taken the mask off how the empire operates, because all the different nodes that the US empire and its accomplice Britain has around the world have revealed themselves, because they've been used. Because this isn't just an Israeli genocide, this is I would say principally a US, UK, Israeli genocide. Obviously, the Germans are involved as well, but in terms of the active support, the US and the UK are central. And then you have the City of London as well, which, again, we don't talk about enough on the left, but the City of London is another way that Britain retained its imperial system, because the City of London is a very interesting institution, because it's a private corporation, but it runs a whole part of London, i.e. it's a different jurisdiction to the national jurisdiction. In fact, it was during the Roman invasion 2,000 years ago, during the Norman invasion 1,000 years ago, they were granted their own rights, which they've had ever since, and they have their own police force. There's no democratic system there. Institutions vote instead of people, and it's mostly banks. And they have this web of tax havens around the world, which are also British overseas territories like the Virgin Islands, Bermuda, and so much of the dirty money around the world and illicit money, which is used by the richest people in the world to avoid tax, it goes through these overseas territories, and so much money is going through the City of London. So obviously, when you have this whole apparatus based in the UK, which is central to the imperial system, you want to guard against, number one, people messing with it in a material way, but also revealing the truth about it. And the reason I believe, sorry, I'm rattling on, but the reason I believe that they allow what they call the free press is because it doesn't do its job. So they get to use it as a soft power technique. They go around the world saying we support democracy and freedom. Look at our press. People can say what they want. But they allow it because it never impinges on their ability to project power or to use their power. As soon as you have a journalist who actually takes their job seriously and really reveals the mechanics of how the whole operation works, like Julian Assange, they stick him in prison and no one even bats an eyelid. And that's what you realize, that all these rights that we're told we have, they evaporate as soon as you start taking them too seriously. And we're finding that out in a very real way, because on top of everything, on top of the British establishment asserting its control, we've got a hugely powerful Israel lobby, which has its claws deep into our political system, maybe the most of any foreign power after the United States. And it's a scary thing to see. But again, there's a confidence and a bravery that I've not seen amongst people before, because I think watching what we all have watched for the last 2 years has made people just not care as much as they used to about their own safety in the context. And you're seeing that with Palestine Action. It's absolutely amazing what people are doing, and I feel bad that I haven't done it. But people are going out even though they know that they're a prescribed organization, and up to 14 years in prison for saying you support them, and they're sitting with placards saying I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action, and getting arrested en masse. Just yesterday, 66 people were arrested outside the Labour Party conference for that, and they're making it unworkable, which is an amazing thing. You know, the people are winning in that extent. They're making this draconian policy unworkable. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, no, great points. Great points, Matt. Well, let's move to a kind of a different example of this growing desperation and attempts to protect the Israeli regime on the part of the United States and the United Kingdom. But this particular example is with TikTok. You know, Benjamin Netanyahu. Oh, actually, this is the wrong clip. You know, Benjamin Netanyahu has been incredibly desperate looking of late. We had the UN debacle where he essentially spoke to an empty room during the UN General Assembly. And then after this, he was caught talking to social media influencers, particularly TikTokers, on Israel's essential plan to take over this media outlet for its benefit. I just want to play a bit of this, and then we can start with you, Patrick. Here we go.
Influencers. He said, he talked about the woke right. He said, I call it the woke Reich. That's a brilliant. The woke right, because these people, you know, they're not any different from the woke left. I mean, they're insane. But they're actually meeting on some of the things. And what we have to do is we have to secure that part of the base of our support in the United States. That is being challenged systematically. A lot of this is done with money of NGOs, vast, money of governments, vaster. Okay, we have to fight back. How do we fight back? Our influencers. I think you should also talk to them if you have a chance. To that community, they're very important. And secondly, we're going to have to use the tools of battle. You know, the weapons change over time. You can't fight today with swords. That doesn't work very well. Okay. And you can't fight with cavalry. That doesn't work very well. And you have these new things, you know, like drones, things like that. I won't get into that. But we have to fight with the weapons that apply to the battlefields in which we're engaged. And the most important ones are in social media. And the most important purchase that is going on right now is TikTok. TikTok, number one. And I hope it goes through because it can be consequential. And the other one, what's the other one? That's the most important. X. That's very good.
So there you go, Patrick. This wholesale of TikTok is for Israel a hugely important component of it waging a more effective war, because what essentially Netanyahu is also ceding there is he says fighting with the sword isn't very effective. We've seen, you know, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians be killed by essentially Israel and U.S. and UK backed sword. But it's not effective. What's needed is TikTok and social media and the rest to be taken over. What's your reaction to this? How do you see this in light of this kind of growing desperation that we see on the part of Israel, given its growing isolation in the world? Your mic is, I don't know, you're not muted, but.
Oh, sorry. Go. You got me now? Yeah.
Yep. Gotcha.
So Netanyahu's made a stunning self-indictment as usual, without meaning to. But the whole concept of the takeover of TikTok was based on a false premise that the Chinese were stealing the data of, you know, American teenagers who were doing like dance acts on TikTok and hot takes and whatnot, viral videos. Totally fake. That was engineered to get us under Joe Biden's administration. It began and continued under Trump. So you can see the bipartisan U.S. Congress and Senate working on behalf of Israel. So it was totally disingenuous. There was no Chinese threat on TikTok. And what you have now, you can see the end game of it. And so Israel's soft power has tanked. Basically, it's not only tanked in the West, but it's also tanking among even the Jewish diaspora or the international Jewish community. They can no longer rely on the promise that Israel is the safest place on the planet for Jews to have a homeland, etc. And a lot of that can be held at the feet of Benjamin Netanyahu. The other thing that I think is interesting is how he appropriated the term woke right. And where that term originated from is interesting. In the aftermath of October 7th, and you had Ben Shapiro and other sort of Zionist mouthpieces flooding social media, warning of all sorts of, day of rage, Islamic sleeper cells are going to rise up and so forth. Even Charlie Kirk himself was trafficking in those same, that same sort of hysteria in the United States. And people were pointing out that if you define wokeness, or as the right does, they define wokeness as the kind of rabid, out of control identity politics. Well, there is no higher form of identity politics than Zionism. This has to be the top level of the conception of identity politics for an ethno state or a religious state, exclusive religious state running an apartheid system. That can only be described as identity politics writ large. So that's where the term originally woke right came from, was to describe people like Ben Shapiro, and then the Fox News crowd, the Jordan Peterson crowd, the Daily Wire crowd, then repurposed it, reappropriated it to point at people on the right that were opposing Israel's genocide, you see. So it was a bit of a sleight of hand, and you can see Netanyahu is attempting to do this 2 years on, which is quite pathetic, actually. And the real irony, of course, of that is that identity politics is the thing. This is the most weaponized form of identity politics in human history, is Zionism, the Zionist ideology. And they're using it as a weapon in order to try to justify one of the worst crimes against humanity of not just the modern era, but I will say one of the worst of all time, certainly in living memory. So I think the irony of that is quite amazing. I mean, you could go on and on, but the bottom line is, and Naftali Bennett, former Israeli prime minister, said it the best. He was decrying the fact that they had blown 120 or 150 million trying to buy influence across social media platforms post October 7th, and we're being outnumbered by pro-Palestinian posts 16-1. 16-1. And I'll tell you, Palestine didn't spend any money to get that margin of victory in terms of hearts and minds across social media.
Yeah, Larry, the crisis of legitimacy, in particular for Israel in the United States specifically, is getting quite bad, to the point where you have 60% of Generation Z Americans saying that they are far more in favor of Hamas than they are of Israel. And I think that this has something to do with why Netanyahu sees the sale of TikTok as such an important weapon for itself in this time. What's your take on this, Larry? Oh, sorry, you're muted. I can't.
Right. There we go. It goes through the broader change and revolution with respect to media narrative control. I spent a brief stint during my time at CIA working on what they call covert action, how you plant stories to try to further a narrative. In this case, I was working in support of to counter the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And, with something like that, it was easy to portray the Soviets as the bad guys and us as the good guys, even though that wasn't really the truth. But, the narrative worked. The three of you are really too young to remember the Exodus influence. And the movie Exodus with Paul Newman came out in 1960, 61. But it was around a lot on television during that period. And it pushed this entire David versus Goliath narrative in support of the Zionists, that they were these good, humble, just, wanting to plant olive trees and feed the bird kind of people. And these nasty Arabs are running around raping and killing Karen, the blonde Norwegian girl. So, and that when you're 10, 11, 12 years old, getting fed that propaganda, it has some influence. The media was much, much easier to control back then. I just used these statistics earlier with Judge Knapp. In 1968, there were a total of 54 million people that watched the three largest news broadcast stations in the U.S., CBS, ABC, NBC. Of those three, CBS with Walter Cronkite accounted for 28 million people. In August of 2016, those three stations, plus Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, combined, had an audience of 27 million. Even though the United States population from 1968 to 2016 had increased by about 140 million people. So we had far more people, far fewer watching. So that's why this whole social media space, particularly on the internet, and with Facebook, with TikTok, with Twitter/X, that has it has created new challenges for the government to try to control it. And fortunately, as was the case during the Soviet Union, when they had imposed a lot of restrictions upon what could be printed, what could be published, what could be aired. At that time, a subculture called samizdat grew up, in which surreptitiously articles that went against the main narrative, the popular narrative, were circulating. And so, in spite of government efforts to try to control, shape, and dictate what the narrative would be, there was still, just like water seeking a way through solid rock, it finds a way. And so that's what we're living with today. We're seeing desperate efforts of the governments in the United States, in Europe, and in Israel to try to control the narrative. But shows like yours, like what Patrick does, Judge Napolitano, Nima, the Duran, you go down the list of and things you may even disagree with, but there's so much out there, it actually makes it almost impossible for the government to control it. And that's the bright side, or the silver lining to this dark cloud.
Yeah, and Matt, I'm curious on what you think about where this falls into why Israel is so desperate to latch on to the information war with regard to the sale of TikTok and social media in general, X, because here you have in Israeli media, with European leaders bowing to fringe groups, Israel must prepare, written by actually University of Southern Wales UK research fellow for the Israel Center for Grand Strategy in the UK. This shift, Matt, in Europe in particular, is not just Europe, as I showed earlier. It's with younger Americans. The vast majority of people in the United States also are incredibly opposed to what Israel is doing and see the United States as a big backer of this. It's clear as day. Where does all this fit into this overall refocus or double down focus on the part of Israel on information warfare? Sorry, I can't unmute you. No,
well, their brand is now tainted and I would say destroyed. And Zionism is from the start has been all about lobbying great power to get what it wants. Obviously, the whole nightmare began in London with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, when the British government promised Palestine to the Zionist movement, and that was a very kind of, that they were shoehorned into that effectively by people like Chaim Weizmann, and they saw what they were successful in what they did, but they saw that they needed to get the great powers on their side. At that time, Britain was the most powerful country in the world if they wanted to get what they want, and they know that the whole of their existence relies on the population, particularly in the United States, but also in Europe, being on their side and supporting their government, supporting them. And actually, I think that has the biggest rupture with that strategy ever is now in place. And I believe it's never going to go back, because the other thing is Zionism has also always tried to market itself. Well, it markets itself different to different sectors, but it often markets itself as this progressive force. You know, it's often linked to the history of persecution of the Jewish people. It's linked to progressive ideals like socialism and stuff. Or lobby groups try and do that. But if you look at what Zionism is as an ideology and as an idea, it's a deeply regressive, supremacist, settler colonial ideology. It's not got anything to do with progressive ideals or progressive sensibilities. And that whole fantasy and mythology, even the term liberal Zionism, which is an oxymoron, and used a lot, it's unsustainable now, and it's never going back. So that's why. And actually, I think Netanyahu's going to find that out, because I actually think he's sincere when he says that he thinks that getting hold of TikTok through Larry Ellison will will be consequential and get the population back on side. But I think he doesn't understand that it's gone way too far. People's eyes are open, and especially young people. And these are the people that in the coming generations are going to be in the Foreign Office in the UK, in the State Department in the US. The whole generation coming up absolutely hates Israel and actually sees it as synonymous with evil, which it is. So I think that it won't work, and I think that as it becomes clearer and clearer that it won't work, then they're gonna have to go to another strategy. And they're even talking. I mean, they are aware that they've lost the world to that extent. If you listen to Netanyahu's speech the other day, where he said we have to plan for isolation. And we have to plan for autarky economically, i.e. we have to produce all our own goods because we can't trust that we won't be hit with trade embargoes. That's quite significant. And as I say, the whole strategy, because they know that they're a small little country, to keep the grand powers on side, when that umbilical cord which runs from Washington, London, Berlin to Tel Aviv is cut, which I think it will be, not immediately, but over the coming decades, then it's going to be very hard for them to survive, because this is a country of 9 million people. You know, it's got a GDP smaller than Sweden. It can't survive without the United States for like a couple of weeks, particularly militarily. So I am quite hopeful that in the long term, Zionism is dying, and also that they won't be able to reverse it, no matter how many social media platforms they buy. The other point is also, look, they have huge control over social media already, and still the whole world's turned against them. You know, Meta has censors on behalf of Israel all the time. They've got significant numbers of former spies, Israeli spies, working for them. Same with Elon Musk is a big supporter of Israel, and it's not worked. So I think that they're going to find that out very quickly. The interesting question is, how do we translate that shift in public consciousness around the world into policy changes within our own government? Because it is happening slowly. And I'll just give you some examples from the UK, particularly because it's not happening in the same way in the US, because Trump is so under control of Israel. But here, just the other day, the Royal College of Defence Studies, which is the most elite UK military training school, said that they will no longer take Israeli personnel. It's the first time they've done that since it was created by Winston Churchill in the early 20th century. This is a huge, significant moment. They've also said that they're going to recognize Palestine, which I have a problem with this whole move, but it's still something that they know will piss off the Israelis, and they're still willing to do it. And this is at a time, we're 2 years in. Think about 3, 4, 5 years down the line. There's going to be so much pressure on the government that they're going to have to start translating public opinion into policy, and there's nothing the Israelis can do. The question is, once they've become isolated and they're running their autarkic economy, how do we actually dismantle it and actually have some kind of justice and peace in between the river and the sea? And that's another question. I can't see how that happens without some kind of holy, like existential war, because Israel has nukes. This is the important thing. You know, this is what all the different resistance groups, including and governments in the region, dance around the whole time. This is a country that has a huge nuclear weapons arsenal, and is mad enough to use it, for sure. In fact, some people said that the reason Trump bombed Iran was because Netanyahu said, look, we don't have the technology to get as deep as we need to take out the nuclear facility, so I'm going to use a nuke. And Trump was like, no, don't do that. I'll bomb with the US fleet. I don't know if that's true, but the point is that it is extremely dangerous when you have this completely insane regime. And I'm not just saying that rhetorically. They are completely insane. They killed the most amount of journalists that have ever been killed by a state in one go on record. Just 2 weeks ago in Yemen. They've massacred people for tweets. When you have a state like that is a huge nuclear arsenal, this is a threat to the whole world. It's not just a threat to West Asia. So it is a scary prospect.
Yeah, indeed. And Patrick, the whole TikTok situation when it comes to the sale. There are, of course, reports that it's going to be Oracle that will gain majority ownership, and it's a pro-Israel tech firm whose main venture capitalist, Larry Ellison, is one of Silicon Valley's most prominent pro-Israel figures, according to the Cradle, and has made significant donations to the Friends of the Israel Defense Forces. So there's obviously a direct connection that Netanyahu is drawing, given that one of Israel's most wealthy and largest friends will be taking control of it. What's your assessment? What's your reaction?
Well, I think it goes a lot deeper than that, Danny. Even look at the UK. The Starmer government's pushing hard to implement a digital ID. And who is the front man for this project? In fact, who's been the front man for the digital ID in the UK since long before Keir Starmer was sworn in as prime minister is Tony Blair. So a war criminal, Tony Blair, whose foundation has garnered no less than $300 million from, guess who? Larry Ellison. So clearly there's an interest with Larry Ellison, Oracle, and this sort of tech empire to run the back end for databases for this new digital ID program, which basically will be ubiquitous across all systems and centralizing a centralized node for every sort of citizen. And this will be gateways for everything: internet access, social media, banking, right to work, and et cetera, et cetera. So clearly this is a technocratic end run around basic rights and right to privacy and so forth. And it can be hugely politicized. So when you consider that, and Larry Ellison being Israel's one of their biggest assets on the planet in terms of a tech mogul, and then you drill down even further and you realize at some point during the founding stages of Oracle that the Central Intelligence Agency were deeply involved in this and many other similar enterprises. Larry Johnson can probably comment on this area, but we have venture capital firms like In-Q-Tel that are routinely involved in providing the seed funding and seeding the board initially of board members of some of these corporations. There's a joke in Brazil, Danny, I don't know if you heard it, but some Brazilians will laugh and say, "We don't decide our elections, Oracle decides our elections." So all of these systems, electronic voting systems, election systems, have been road tested in so-called third world countries by United States intelligence with their tech moguls. And these can also be deployed in America. They can be deployed in Britain, across Europe, if they're not already being deployed in that fashion. So in terms of manufacturing consent or election outcomes, certainly you've got a prime minister in Britain that is absolutely will go to the wall for Israel no matter what they do. That's pretty clear. But in a prime minister with a very low approval rating, and right across Europe, you have all these leaders that are clinging to a mandate with high 20%, low 30%, and stitched together with flimsy coalitions. So there's no way they can represent what the public majority want or believe or feel. And the United States goes for the same thing in the United States. But yet, and when it comes to supporting Israel, you could end up in the next 10 years having governments that support Israel still, but people that are just totally against it. And I think you're already seeing that now. So this gulf increases between where the public are and where the elite bureaucracy are, and where the big billionaire oligarch class are. And of course, many of those oligarchs, whether they're Christians or whether they're Jewish, they're all Zionist. That's the thing they have in common.
Yeah, very good points. And I think that can bring us to the last segment I wanted to cover. And actually, it's a bit of a breaking story. I don't know how breaking it is, really, given that it's all happening on one side, Patrick, as you mentioned, the kind of bureaucratic oligarch class side, and not so much the Palestinian side. But there is news of a so-called peace deal that Trump has unveiled. The details have come out after meeting with Netanyahu in Washington, and here they are. It stipulates that the conflict would end immediately if accepted by both Israel and Hamas. All hostages would be who have either died or who remain would be returned 72 hours of the agreement. It would also see Israel release over 2,000 prisoners, and Israel would not be able to occupy or annex Gaza. And it encourages Gaza residents to stay in place, but there's going to be a panel of experts to rebuild and energize, quote unquote, the Gaza Strip. Now, the plans, of course, and this has been something that has been a huge stipulation, even in the so-called recognition drive by European countries in the UK. It calls for Hamas not to have any direct or indirect role in the governance of Gaza, instead handing control of the territory to a quote-unquote technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering day-to-day running of public services. It would be overseen by a board of peace headed and chaired by Trump himself and involve participation of other world leaders, and you'll like this one, Matt, including UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister. So let's start with you, Larry. Hamas, the resistance in Palestine, has not really been consulted on this. What's your assessment on or reaction to this development, given that the resistance as of right now is still fighting very hard?
It's a propaganda show. Look, there are 14 other Palestinian groups. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I can't remember them all. So yeah, they're not going away either. This may be Israel's face-saving way to try to get out of a very intractable situation. They launched their offensive to wipe out Hamas in Gaza City 3 weeks ago. This is the start of the third week. How are they doing? Well, the reports today are that the Israeli helicopters were quite active evacuating Israeli casualties from Gaza City. So the Qassam brigade is not going anywhere. The other thing we don't really have a lot of good information on is I guarantee you there are commercial relationships between members of Israel's polite society and Hamas. We know from the past that Mossad was dealing with Hamas, whether undercover or without cover. Nonetheless, they had commercial relationships where money was being moved back and forth. I saw the start of the press conference, and who walks in with just before Donald Trump? Jared Kushner, Mr. I want to develop the beaches in Gaza, man. So, I don't doubt that there are some nefarious plans afoot to, like the proverbial camel slipping its nose under the tent. This is to get Jared Kushner's feet in the water there off the Gaza shores, and to retake Gaza, not by fighting and killing, but by building and taking property and forcing the Palestinians out. So while I hope for an end to the fighting, this is not going to solve the underlying problem. And look, we just had Bibi Netanyahu last week at the United Nations, sparsely attended, I might add, to make it very clear, there will be no two-state solution, period. So here's Trump talking his plan, and I don't think he paid attention to what Bibi said last week.
Yeah, and Matt, I just want to remind and unmute yourself first, but please, your reaction to this. I mean, you have Tony Blair sitting on this quote unquote board of peace headed by Donald Trump. No consultation with the Palestinian resistance, which is to engage in heavy fighting in places like Khan Yunis and other areas of Gaza directly with the Israeli regime. And of course, you have the rest of the resistance that has not let up. What's your take on this breaking plan that Trump is trying to push through, on all sides of this conflict, given its complicity in it?
Well, first of all, the Tony Blair issue. I mean, it's like a horror movie, really, isn't it? This guy is like a Dracula. He's just sucks blood wherever he goes. This is a guy that was led my country into an illegal war in Iraq, where hundreds of British soldiers died, or up to 1 million Iraqis were killed. The whole region was destroyed. He should be in prison. So, let alone the fact that he's chosen to be part of the governing committee or whatever Trump's calling it, is sick. And it just, again, it's an imposition. This is the US role in the Israel-Palestine conflict from the start. You know, they've run the so-called peace process, but they're on Israel's side and have been from the beginning. So that's why it's so intractable. Trump's record on Israel is appalling. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem in his first term, and then there was the Great March of Return at the same time, and he didn't say a word as Israeli snipers massacred nurses and health workers and peaceful protesters who were just walking to the gates of their prisons. So I don't recognize them as having any right to impose a solution on Gaza. And if you look at I was just looking at some of the fine print of what they're saying. They're saying there's going to be a security buffer zone, part of which will be the whole of the Philadelphia corridor, the Rafah, or the border with Rafah, so that Gaza's going to shrink. I don't know. Obviously, it's got Hamas. Obviously, and other resistance groups have had no input into this so-called peace deal. But again, that's emblematic of the way it's worked from the start. There was a ceasefire agreement that Hamas was basically close to 100% agreeing with, and then Israel bombed the mediators in Qatar. Israel is not going to accept anything other than exactly what they want, and it's a maximalist regime, and they got control of the Trump White House. So I don't know what will happen with this. Whether Hamas probably won't accept it, but again, as Larry mentioned, we should listen to Israeli ministers when they tell us what their vision for Gaza is, because they have told us from the start, going back to when Gallant said that he was going to starve 2.3 million people, not allow any food, water, and electricity. But even more recently, Smotrich, the finance minister, said that in a few months there will be no one left in Gaza. We're going to destroy the whole thing. Ben Gvir, the security minister, has said similar things. So I think their idea, they, in my opinion, they saw October 7th as their 9/11 and their fight and the pretext to finally solve their so-called Palestinian problem. The Palestinian problem for them is a whole reservoir of indigenous people that they've displaced and kicked off their land and put in prisons. What do you do with them? And they've obviously, people put in a prison are going to respond and resist, and so they want to just get rid of them. And I think that is their end goal. This is what we've all seen the images of Gaza, right? And they're doing the same thing to Gaza City now, right? It's destroyed. They've erased it. Every high-rise has been taken down in Gaza City over the past couple of weeks. And the ministers have been celebrating it. Israel Katz was celebrating the highest high-rise going down today, the defense minister. They're not doing that to allow the Palestinians to go back. That's not what you do if you want to rebuild. What they're doing is they're raising it. It's a year zero thing. And they're going to rebuild it without Palestinians. And there was a plan that was leaked from Netanyahu maybe about a year ago, where they envisioned like a new Dubai, and the new plan from Trump does mention special economic zones, and special economic zones I've done a lot of work on. They're basically just corporate utopias. So It won't work. It won't work. And as been mentioned by other people, the resistance is still fighting in Khan Yunis, but also in other areas. In Gaza City today, there was an operation. So are they just going to accept the fact that they have to completely down all their weapons? They have to accept that they're living under this genocidal power, and they're living under the control of Tony Blair and Donald Trump. I don't think they will accept it, and they shouldn't accept it, to be honest, because obviously we all want to see an end to the fighting and the genocide. But if they put through this plan, I believe the end goal will be to completely depopulate Palestine. And behind closed door, they're probably aware of that. They're probably talking about that. They're probably saying, well, it's too hard. We can't move the people we want, because they've tried. 500,000 people have left Gaza City over the past week, but there's still hundreds of thousands of people there. They haven't been able to do what they wanted, which was to depopulate and move everyone to Al Mawasi near Khan Yunis. They haven't been able to do it. So this is maybe a stopgap where they'll stabilize it, and then they'll find more peaceful ways or more effective ways to move the Palestinians, and eventually find a third country that will take them. That's what I believe their plan is. So I think, it's propaganda. It's either set up for Hamas to reject, or it's set up to be the prelude to a depopulation and occupation, complete occupation, and rebuilding it as a real estate bonanza for the Israelis and the Americans.
Yeah, and Patrick, Matt said, the resistance hasn't stopped. This includes also Yemen. We see the Red Sea ships continue to be attacked. Those who are Israeli linked, they are getting attacked by Yemen. And of course, given that the Palestinian resistance and Palestinian leadership have not been consulted on this, that won't stop the Red Sea blockade, nor the targeting of Israeli strategic sites by Yemeni ballistic missiles. And then there's this, I wanted to play you this because there's a lot of, I think, suspicions that, of course, any kind of peace plan, quote unquote, pushed through by Trump is really just serving Israel. So much so that we have Netanyahu. He's been going around mainstream media of late, almost running interference for himself, trying to show that he is not in control, that there's no one in control, that Israel has no role. I mean, we saw this with the whole Charlie Kirk debacle, where he had to go on Twitter and then mainstream media and say, we didn't do anything, over and over and over again. And here he goes again, talking to mainstream media about this claim that he is in the Israeli regime is essentially influencing and controlling the Trump administration.
President Trump has been an incredible ally of Israel, incredible friend. We've had no one like him. What he did in his first term in recognizing Jerusalem as our capital, moving the American embassy there, recognizing our sovereignty over the Golan Heights, getting out of the disastrous Iran deal. And then, of course, now joining us in the effort to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons by taking out some of these nuclear sites with us. I think it's great. I read somewhere this ridiculous slide. President Trump does what he does because he decides what's in America's best interest. And I've said this often, I don't decide a thing for President Trump. He is the most independent leader and amazing leader that I've seen in all my years. And I think many people in the world see that.
So Netanyahu, I don't know if he was asked that, but he has no influence over Trump. He doesn't decide anything for Trump. Patrick, your thoughts about this and what this peace plan shows about Israel's interference in U.S. politics?
Well, first off the bat, reportage says the opposite, that Netanyahu himself is making cabinet calls directly and via Miriam Adelson and some of the big donors that basically purchased the White House in the 2024 election. So they, in fact, and it's worth pointing out once again that the entire cabinet, anybody that touches national security or that touches foreign policy, had to be pro-Israel and were shortlisted by the Israeli donor class, by the Israeli lobby. Okay, so that's the level of penetration of, quote, foreign interference, the thing they accused Russia of doing for the last 10 years. That's the level of penetration into this Trump White House. So it's unprecedented. It's never been seen before. And by the way, that's probably why they're dropping the ball so badly on Ukraine and Russia, because everybody from the State Department right across the board are only equipped and care about one issue, and that's Israel, period. Is it good for Israel? Is it bad for Israel? So that's that. Look, the leak on this so-called peace plan was a strategic leak. That should tell you straight away this thing is a complete scam. Okay. Jared Kushner, the president-in-law, as we used to call him, the president-in-law, he was the sort of guy who carried the Abraham Accords. Okay. He fronted that whole joke of a peace plan. And the feature about the Abraham Accords is that they never consulted the Palestinians, and the Palestinians weren't involved at all in this great grand peace bargain for the Middle East. And Trump still believes he should get a Nobel Prize for it, when in fact it was the Abraham Accords that probably accelerated the conditions for October 7th to happen. So you would get anything but the Nobel Peace Prize for that. But because of that, they're doing the same. The normal Israeli negotiation strategy is to make some kind of an impossible bargain deal, and usually in absentia of the counterparty negotiating, in this case Hamas. And then if it's rejected or if it's not accepted, then they say, oh, it's a perfectly good deal, and we offered Arafat or whoever the Palestinian negotiator, whoever's alive, to negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians or Hamas. Oh, it's a perfectly good deal. Trump is adopting verbatim the exact same tactic. He's even using this against the Russians. Oh, we offered a perfectly good deal and they didn't accept it. Same thing here. So this thing is designed to fail. But you read the fine print on this. The fine print. If Hamas leaders agree to leave Gaza, that's part of the conditions. Okay. So so are they going to go to Qatar and they say, well, we'll give Qatar an amnesty as long as they comply for this term right here. The other place where they might go is Egypt, because there's a lot of pressure on Egypt from the Egyptian public to step up and basically head off what is a huge humanitarian disaster and just an unthinkable situation in Gaza. And so just like clockwork, what do you have this week? Go to the New York Times, and they say, Israeli officials, spokesperson is concerned that Hamas terrorists have crossed over the border into the Sinai, along with anything like 100,000 medical evacuees and people fleeing the Gaza Strip. Okay, so they're creating the conditions for a 1978 PLO South Lebanon trap. And that was the pretext Israel used to attack Lebanon, to invade and occupy South Lebanon, and they occupied for over 2 decades, effectively. So they are engineering the identical trap with Israel, with Egypt and the Sinai. And by doing that, if they can claim they have intelligence, or they can push Palestinians into the Sinai, that gives Israel and the IDF license to attack what they call terrorist targets in Egypt. And where is that going to end? Okay. And so I think this is the thing. You're looking at a big scam that is underway now. And the last thing they have intended to do is any kind of peace, ceasefire, or stop the fighting. Israel always does one thing in negotiations. That's they drag it on to change facts on the ground. And right now they're just about done partitioning the West Bank, okay, by isolating East Jerusalem. And so that whole situation in annexing the Jordan Valley, okay, that's all in motion right now. That's all underway. And to the hard right, which is all of Israel at this point, Israel has shifted so far to the right. They're looking at this as the final 5 yards of the end final solution for Gaza. That's how they are seeing it. This is how they're publicly articulating it. So all of this stuff with peace deals, Trump ceasefire, I wouldn't trust them as far as you could throw them. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Yeah, and Larry and Matt, maybe we can end with your final comments. As Patrick was talking about the folly of trusting negotiations that have any role of the United States and Israel in them, in the press conference about this, he says this, Donald Trump, everyone has accepted this plan. I have a feeling we're going to get a positive answers. If not, as you know, Bibi, you have our full backing to do what you have to do. And I think that sums up exactly what the US's and Trump's posture has been on this from the very beginning, always with that caveat in there that Israel essentially has absolutely no leash on it whatsoever. Larry, you're muted, so unmute before you start. But yes, please.
Well, I agree. You know, I think Patrick did a great job of outlining both the historical context that this is deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra said. It's the past repeating, at least along the same chords. Maybe some of the specific notes are off, but the basic chord structure is the same. And Netanyahu apparently at this press conference, because I've been seeing, getting some flashes across my screen, basically reiterated that, a Palestinian state is still unacceptable to Israel. And this entire fantasy about, Israel being this Zionist state. And what I mean by fantasy is its population, 80% of the population came from Europe primarily. Because you go back and you look at the census that was taken first in 1922, then in 1931. The Jewish population in 1931 was like 174,000. The Palestinian population was close to 800,000. And then within 20 years, the numbers had been completely flipped. That you had millions of Jews. Well, they just fall out of the sky. So, they've stolen the land. They're not about to give back that stolen land. And it's going to be up to Hamas and the various resistance groups to either find a way to fight it, continue fighting, and ultimately weaken Israel, or be eliminated. I would simply note that, 3 weeks ago, Israel launched its operation to take full control of Gaza City. Well, here we are 3 weeks later. You've got the Israeli military, or Israeli Defense Force, with every single advantage an army could have. I mean, they've got full control of the air. They've got overhead satellites. They've got all sorts of intelligence collection systems. They have artillery. They have tanks. They have armored personnel carriers. And they have Hamas bottled up in a specific area. It's sort of like having Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett, locked in at the Alamo. And yet Israel can't beat them. They can't defeat them. They've had, for God's sake, now 2 full years to try. And it's not, you hear all these idiot Western analysts make fun about, the Russians haven't taken much territory. Yeah, they're fighting a NATO peer force, a NATO force that has almost every kind of weapon system that Russia has. And in spite of that, Russia keeps moving forward. It keeps killing more of them. Unlike the Israelis, who have a confined area locked in, and they can't defeat it. And right, today, as I mentioned earlier, they're taking more casualties. And so I think Hamas is content to try to bleed them out if they can, because Israel cannot sustain the casualties. They're already down about 2 million people since the start of the war.
Yeah, Matt, your final thoughts. I've always found this to be one of the most the stark points that Larry just brought up. Is you do have the resistance. They don't give up. Not only do they not give up, but essentially Gaza is itself what many have said is a prison, literally built to do what is happening to the Palestinians right now, a genocide. And yet the resistance doesn't stop. And I think this is a huge problem, both for the Israeli regime and the United States, which sees, of course, Gaza and Palestine as a big part of its overall power projection in the region. So your final thoughts on the situation overall, the peace plan, et cetera, wherever you want to go with it. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I think that the resistance point is huge. You know, like you've had 2 years nearly of 3 nuclear armed powers basically throwing everything they have got at this small little bit of territory. You know, it's 20 miles long and 4 to 5 miles wide, and they can't beat the resistance. And again, like you mentioned, this is a prison. Most of the weapons being used are repurposed Israeli weapons because there's no way to get weapons in. So it is an incredible campaign fought by the Palestinian resistance. And I agree with Larry that the longer it goes on for Israel, the worse it's going to get, because they can't move. They haven't achieved any of their goals. Hamas and the resistance are still active. Hundreds of thousands of people are still in the parts of Gaza that they've wanted to move. Nothing has been achieved apart from a complete obliteration of their reputation around the world and arrest warrants for their prime minister and defense minister. So they probably do want to draw it to a close. But I also think that as they've gone on this long, it does create the conditions for them to carry on, because they can't stop until they get some tangible victory, because they haven't. The hostages that they have got back have been got through exchange deals. Most of them they have rescued. So they did the Nusrat massacre where they killed nearly 300 Palestinians to rescue 4 hostages, but the majority have been got through exchanges. If the concern was to get the hostages back, that's what they would have focused on, but that's not been their concern. Their concern has been to obliterate Gaza. But I do agree with Patrick that this is designed to fail. Just having read in a cursory fashion what the stipulations are, because the Israelis firstly never negotiate in good faith, and secondly, even when they sign up to deals, they don't hold to it. You know, there was a ceasefire on the first that came into effect the first day of Trump's term in office in January. And then in March, 2 months later, they just completely broke it. And it was going to plan. That could have been a ceasefire that would have got all the hostages home and would have created peace. But they don't want peace. They want to destroy Gaza, and they want their final solution. And they've got their pretext, which they probably are thinking we're never going to get again. So I think that they're designing this for Hamas to reject it, and as Patrick say, that then gives them a propaganda weapon to say, "Well, we offered everything that they needed, and they rejected us." The other thing is, it's also suicidal on the part of Hamas, because the Israelis, although they say we'll do an amnesty, they will hunt down and kill every single person, Hamas fighter and Hamas negotiator. They did it with the Shalit deal in 2006, and he was taken in 2006, but released 5 years later. And they hunted down all the people that were involved in negotiating that. They bombed the negotiators in Qatar, as I mentioned last month. There's no way that they will abide by allowing these people to leave and set up shop in another country and not hunt them down at some point. So from Hamas's perspective, what have they got to lose? They either continue the resistance or and are taken out eventually, or they put down their weapons and surrender, and they're taken out in another way. So the Israelis, there's no way out for them. So the incentive is to carry on, because in some senses they're winning. Israel's not achieved any of its goals. They're bleeding out the Israeli society itself. There's a lot of problems for Netanyahu domestically. So why sign up to this Trump and Netanyahu designed so-called peace deal?
Yeah, it definitely smells fraudulent, given how important it is for Israel to continue its onslaught here. And all of those points, I think, are really good ones. Gentlemen, this was a great show today. I want to make sure everyone knows that you can find Larry's blog, Patrick's Substack, as well as 21st Century Wire, and Matt's X account in the video description, where you can check out all of his work, journalistic work, as well as I know you have a new book coming out, Matt. Anything you guys want to plug before we head out and we can head out together? No. All right.
Yet.
All right. So everybody, go to the video description to find all those great things. Hit the like button before you go. There is all the places to support this channel, Patreon, Substack, and so much more. I'll be back on the 1st of next month with Ben Norton and KJ No in the evening. So I'll see you then, evening Eastern time. Announcements forthcoming. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.